All right, welcome folks to Last Week I Learned with Jimmy Cerrone. Today we're breaking down the newsletter, which is 5 articles and 1 idea. So without further ado, let's dive in. First up, the Illustrated Children's Guide to Kubernetes by Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Okay, so I'm really envious of the folks that wrote this because I think it's a brilliant idea. Kubernetes is some computing thing that you don't need to know about. What's really cool about this article, and I think worth at least skimming it for, is that it takes a complicated technical subject and it breaks it down into a children's book. And I just think this is so freaking smart. Because when I think about learning, I think about maps, right? Your goal is to orient yourself and understand where you are in a topic, in a subject, and get to where you want to go quickly. And the only way you can really do that is at a high level. If I give you a city map of Chicago and I ask you to find, I don't know, North Side, like that's going to be very difficult. Or even let's say like you've never been to the United States and I say find Chicago on a map. Like it's not useful. Like you have to get the map right and understand where someone's at. And just the same way, if you give someone from Chicago a map of the US, like that's not really useful. They already know where Chicago is. So we have to get our maps right. And I think this does such a great job of getting the map right. And I think the takeaway here is for any subject, you have to think about where's your audience on the map? Are they looking for a city map? Are they looking for a state map? Are they trying to find highways? Like what's going on? What's their goal? Who are they? How much do they know? And I think this article just kicked it out of the park. And I would really push you, if you're not technical, please still read this because I think it's a great example of taking something very complicated and distilling it in just the right way. It's a very good map and it's worth looking at. Okay, next up, The Importance of Learning CSS by Josh. Can't pronounce his last name, it's French. This is another technical article. I apologize. 2 for 2. And I'm going to push, in the last article I talked about, you should read it because it's not technical and you should just understand how to make a good map. I'm pushing this one because it's technical. I think one of my friends talked about this. He's a great developer. He's been in the business for like 20 years. And he was like, really study the things that don't change. And this is an idea from Nassim Taleb, who writes about, black swans and anti-fragility. But the point is, ideas that stick around for a long time stick around for a reason. And CSS was one of those things that stuck around for a reason. Anything you see visually on a website involves CSS. And I think understanding CSS and HTML, which are the bedrock foundation of the internet as we know it, that gives you a huge leg up whether you work in tech or not. I mean, it's just so important. If you know what the map looks like for both of these at like a country level, if you know where the states are and what the most important cities are of HTML and CSS, like that takes you a long way no matter what you do. And there's all this hype around AI, and there was all this hype around blockchain before it. But what has really stuck around is this technology. And you don't need to spend forever on it. I don't know if I linked my argument. I did. I linked an article about shallow dives, which I'll link in the show notes here. I've got these two things called shallow dives and deep dives, right? A deep dive is like a college degree, right? You're going to spend a lot of time digging into something. And that's worthwhile for certain topics. A shallow dive, though, is surprisingly effective. A lot of times we don't think to spend an hour reading something. And when in reality, that hour would pay off like crazy. I've done this with everything from, I don't know, like Iran. I spent an hour reading about Iran, and oh my God, do I know so much more about Iran, to like technical things. And that changed my career, made it so much easier for me to work. And it took so much less time than I thought. So I could not recommend a shallow dive on CSS more. This is a great place to start. And I think this is a great use of an hour. It is just digging into CSS. All right, on from that. Perovskite, Japan's Hope. This is by Walter James. Okay, so I'm obsessed with solar panels right now. I was talking to one of my coworkers about this, and we were just talking through how physical things are really intriguing us. As someone who works with computers all day, I want to get my hands dirty in some way. And solar panels are emerging as something really interesting because they're testable. So last week I talked about shrink the change and how important that is. I think solar panels are a really great way to treat the change. Like I can buy a solar panel for my balcony and I can try to charge my phone with it. And I could do that tomorrow, right? And this is like checking so many of my boxes, like killing so many birds with one stone. My old professor called it function stacking. So I'm learning about, renewable energy, I'm learning about electrical engineering, and I'm also like accomplishing an actual task, which is charging something. So I think perovskite is a very interesting technology for this, right? So I didn't know this. Again, this is a shallow dive here, example. There's two types of solar panels. There's like, God, I don't know, traditional solar panels, which are really hard and rigid and big and bulky. And then there's perovskite, which is very flexible and small. And that's what Japan is an expert in. And I think they're doing some really interesting things with this. I think perovskite could be the kind of solar tech that takes off. And I'm going to read the quote just to like quickly lay out why. It says this and their light film-like characteristics make it possible to put them in places where conventional solar panels can't go, like building walls, windows, or roofs of electric vehicles. I think it's pretty powerful. I think this is pretty scalable. So Japan is a leader in this technology, and I don't know, I think it's really interesting what they're doing. So, all right, next up, Why the Law by James Somers. This is such a cool thing to advocate for. I think one of my future shallow dives is going to be law because this guy sold me on it. It's such a great article. It's super well written, super well thought out, and it just lays out an interesting case for the law. This is one of the few takeaways that I had from Democracy in America, which Neil Wida and I read. Super long book, but one of the things he laid out was that the last vestiges of the aristocracy, I can never say that word, of the aristocracy are in the law because it's this like kind of arcane world with a very specific set of rules that if you're not an expert in, you can't understand. And I think James Somers in this article lays out that this touches everything. And so whatever you do, it's important to know about the law. So I'm not sure how I'm going to operationalize this, but I think it's really interesting. So here's the quote. This is what sold me. Like physicists, lawyers can in some sense see the man behind the curtain. They have a privileged, detailed understanding of forces that drive the everyday world we non-physicists, non-lawyers take for granted. So that's my pitch on a shallow dive for law. If you figure out how to do that, please let me know. I have no clue, but it's something I want to do. All right, last article. This one is a little surprising and maybe out of my normal, wheelhouse, but I thought it was really interesting. Called The Mechanics of Dolphin Sex, and it's from Discover Magazine. So, one, I think one of the most interesting things that comes out of this is it's a really practical implication or really practical way of demonstrating our lack of knowledge about the ocean. I I feel like kind of like with solar panels, like the ocean is something I want to know more about. I want to look for things. I think it's Kevin Kelly talks about in your career, try to focus on things that people can't name. I think studying the ocean is one of those things that like it's just weird, right? And we don't understand it very well. And I think this is like a funny example of it, but it really clearly illustrates just how little we know about marine life. Like this is wild. Can you imagine if we didn't like understand how I don't know dogs had sex? Like it's wild to think about that. It's wild to think that we could not know something so fundamentally important to life under the water. So, first thing that's interesting. Second thing, just it's funny, and I think it was worth a read. But I'm going to end with the quote because I think this is really well laid out. So it says, even courtship and mating behaviors are only superficially understood. In most marine species, matings have never been observed because they occur underwater in remote locations. Like just really pounding in how little we humans know about the water. So that wraps up our articles. The idea of the week is wants and needs. I'm realizing this isn't a great title, but one of the things I'm realizing is for most of my life I concealed my wants and needs. I tried to meet them in ways that wouldn't inconvenience anyone. And to be honest, it just led to me being pretty resentful and unhappy. And I'm trying to learn to take the risk of expressing wants and needs. And I found it incredibly freeing. Like, I just don't have that. It's really cut down my anxiety, which surprised me. I would have thought that expressing wants and needs would increase my anxiety because then it's out in the open. But it's been the opposite. I have actually found it incredibly relaxing. Like, there's so much less unknown going on. And so, I don't know, it's been a surprising finding. But a little quote is, well, there's two things I want to point out. One, the I Will Teach You to Be Rich podcast is one of the places I really learned about this. I think Ramit Sethi does a great job of talking through like how to. I think there's taking it too far, right? Where all you think about are your wants and desires, and I think Ramit Sethi does a great job of contextualizing this idea in such a way that he makes it clear that you should still be an empathetic, caring human being, but by being clear about your wants and needs, you can help those around you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I just have to, unfortunately, shout out Drake for a great song, Wants and Needs. Listen to it if you like rap. If not, check out Cloud by Surfaces, which is the song I listen to on repeat to write this newsletter. So there you go. Two song recommendations, a little reference to Drake, Mechanics of Dolphin Sex. Great stuff this week. Thank you so much for joining me. And as always, you can reach out to me via email. Thanks.